In what type of an environment are students from West Baltimore growing up? In the city of Baltimore, poverty and trauma are intimately linked. Between the years of 2009 and 2013, just under a quarter of Baltimore City residents were living below the national poverty line. And according to data from 2011 through 2012, just under a third of Baltimore City children had experienced at least three adverse childhood experiences. We now shift our attention to West Baltimore, and the next several slides will unpack a variety of factors related to poverty that all converge around West Baltimore, including the neighborhoods of Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park. Our focus in these maps will be on the western portion of these various maps of Baltimore City. So first, you'll notice in the map on the left describing the food environment in Baltimore City in 2015 that the red areas refer to food deserts, which are areas in which it is difficult for the residents to access reasonably priced and healthy food. Many of these food deserts are found in West Baltimore. Relatedly, in the map on the right, this map shows the density of liquor license holding establishments around the city. The blue and red dots and triangles each represent such establishments that hold these licenses, and the areas in gray show places where the residents living in those areas, more than 20% of them live under the federal poverty level. Notice both the density and concentration of liquor licenses, as well as those living in poverty in West Baltimore. Continuing with the theme of health, a recent study found that today in Baltimore City, African Americans have access to less acreage of park space than their white counterparts. The map on the right of this slide suggests that this may be due in part to historical structural inequalities in the distribution of park space. Notice that a great deal of the park space in 1930 Baltimore was surrounded by majority native white with native-born parents demographics. Furthermore, access to recreational centers, specifically in West Baltimore, has become scarce in contemporary Baltimore. It is perhaps no surprise that residents from West Baltimore experience some of the lowest life expectancies in all of Baltimore City, as indicated in the map on the left by the areas that are red and orange, which is alongside some of the greatest rates of premature mortality due to major cardiovascular disease, which is indicated in the map on the right by darker shades of red. Walking or driving through neighborhoods in West Baltimore, another conspicuous element of the structure of poverty therein is the number and density of vacant homes. The map on the left from the Washington Post is an image of an interactive map that allows you to move the blue bar left and right to see how a map of residential demographics overlays with areas of vacant homes. The red dots are vacant homes, and the green dots represent black residents, whereas the blue dots represent white residents. This map, as well as the one on the right, show that predominantly black neighborhoods in West Baltimore have a large concentration of vacant buildings. As these official statistics from the Baltimore City Police Department show, West Baltimore also experiences some of the highest percentages of crime in the entire city, totaling 397 violent crimes and 791 property crimes within the first 6 months of 2015. And there's evidence that all of this violence may be related to depression. In a recent 2010 study of Baltimore City young adults from both West and East Baltimore, violence was found to be significantly associated with depressive symptoms. And furthermore, this was an additive association, meaning that the greater the exposure of these young adults to violence, the greater the depressive symptoms that they displayed. And to get a sense of the magnitude of the amount of exposure to violence, over half of their sample, which was comprised of 700 young adults, reported exposure to at least one type of violence. Another factor to consider when unpacking the poverty in West Baltimore is drug activity. A recent 2014 study found that from the years 2000 to 2010, West Baltimore experienced some of the greatest narcotics activity and economic deprivation in all of Baltimore City. You can see on the map to the left that the greater numbers of narcotics calls for service, such as through calling 911 occurred in the areas with the darker shading. And you can see a lot of this darker shading in West Baltimore. And some of those same areas in the map on the right are also shown to experience some of the highest amounts of economic deprivation in the city. Perhaps as a consequence and a symptom of the inequalities found in West Baltimore, including disparities such as those in health, violence, and housing, it is also found that some of the highest incarceration rates in the city and even the state are found in West Baltimore. In fact, a recent report from the Justice Policy Institute found that Maryland taxpayers are paying about $288 million per year to incarcerate nearly 8,000 citizens from Baltimore City. And a disproportionate amount of this money is being spent to incarcerate those citizens that live in the Sandtown Winchester Harlem Park neighborhood. This disproportionate incarceration of mostly black males leads to a phenomenon known as missing black men, as it was recently dubbed in an article from the New York Times. Specifically, you would generally expect a roughly equal number of males and females in any given locale. But due to incarceration and early death in mostly black communities, there are relatively more women and less men. So, as you can see on this slide, cities such as Ferguson, Missouri, have some of the largest proportions of black men missing in their communities, again, resulting from such factors as early death and incarceration. And this is not a trend that you generally see in mostly white communities. Notably, Baltimore is one of the places with the highest absolute number of missing black men. The convergence of all these factors related to poverty in neighborhoods such as Sandtown, Winchester, and others around West Baltimore can be summed up well by a series of recent studies looking at status mobility. Specifically, it was found that children from low-income backgrounds are more likely to succeed in neighborhoods that have less concentrated poverty, less income inequality, better schools, more two-parent families, and lower crime rates. Neighborhoods that are quite unlike those just described in West Baltimore. And furthermore, these studies found that when children move from some of these high poverty neighborhoods to lower poverty neighborhoods, they're likely to experience increased earnings and college quality in adulthood, regardless of race. Now, as an illustrative example of the sort of inequality that exists in Baltimore City, we'll compare two neighborhoods across a variety of indicators. The first being Sandtown Winchester, Harlem Park, and the second being a relatively more affluent neighborhood referred to as North Baltimore, Guilford, or Homeland. These indicators suggest that those in Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park are much more likely to be incarcerated or unemployed, or if they are employed, they are more likely to have to travel greater than 45 minutes to work each day. And the median income suggests that their employment opportunities yield much less than those living in North Baltimore, Guilford, or Homeland. Furthermore, the residents in Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park are more likely to have their energy cut off. More of the adults have not attained at least a high school diploma or GED. Less of the houses are lived in by people who actually own them, and there are far fewer local businesses. Furthermore, in Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park, almost half of the children are living below the poverty line. A greater percentage of households with children under the age of 18 are headed by a female. A greater percentage of adults are on parole or probation. Children are more likely to have elevated blood lead levels. There is a higher mortality rate for young adults as well as a higher violent crime rate. And only about 80% of those between 16 and 19 are in school or employed, compared to 100% in the North Baltimore Guilford Homeland neighborhood. Furthermore, the streets are more often reported as dirty, and remarkably, 10 to 17-year-olds have a much higher arrest rate. Continuing the comparison between these two neighborhoods, we've also selected one K-8 school from each in order to illustrate the educational inequities that students also experience. In School A, in Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park, students are much more likely to be participating in the free and reduced price meal program or be classified as homeless. Students are more likely to be chronically absent and teachers are more likely to miss at least 10 days during the school year. Students at School A are more likely to move between schools during the school year, and students in classrooms in School A are less likely to be sitting in front of a highly qualified teacher. Continuing the school comparison, students in the school in the neighborhood of Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park have access to less per-pupil funding. They are also more likely to receive an out-of-school suspension. Compared to the school in North Baltimore, Guilford, Homeland, about half as many students score proficient or advanced on the state standardized reading test, and kindergartners are less likely to be considered ready when they enter school. Finally, students and parents are less likely to feel comfortable with their school, according to their survey responses. To illustrate what some of these statistics mean, imagine a classroom of 30 students. 27 of the students in the School A in Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park would be receiving free or reduced price meal service. These are the students in orange. 20 students would be absent from school at least 5 days during the school year. 4 students would be absent from school more than 20 days. 13 students would have transferred into or out of the school after the beginning of the school year. And 9 students would not agree with the statement, "Students feel safe at this school." Moving now to the teachers, imagine a faculty of 20 teachers. In this same school, 10 would miss more than 10 days of school in an academic year. And finally, imagine a school that enrolls 250 students. In that neighborhood, in Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park, 119 students may be living below the poverty line. As many as 12 students may have elevated blood lead levels and all the consequences thereof. And as many as 26 students could have their energy cut off at home during the school year.